Hi, my name's John Mertens. I'm running for U.S. Senate in Connecticut in 2010. I'm running as an independent, and over the next 12 months, I'm going to have a series of programs where we do an in-depth discussion of different important long-term problems that we're facing. The reason I'm running for U.S. Senate is that for my entire life, we've been electing Republicans and Democrats and sending them to Washington, hoping that they would solve our long-term problems. And every year, they just keep getting worse. I'm a professor of engineering at Trinity College. I also teach some public policy and environmental science courses. And I'm very passionate about finding solutions to real problems and getting the politicians and Washington to tell us what the solution should be and implement them instead of just arguing among themselves about inconsequential things and talking in very vague terms about what they'll do when they get reelected. So this month, the first episode of our series is going to be on U.S. drug policy. This is a very serious issue that I've been concerned about for many years. And in my opinion, it's just been getting worse. And politicians are scared to even talk about it, let alone talk about solutions to the problem. So we're very fortunate today. The reason this is the first topic that I've chosen to address is because I had the opportunity to invite two experts in the field to talk with me. Cliff Thornton, a Connecticut resident and founder of Efficacy, which he'll talk about soon, and Joseph Brooks, a former police captain from Manchester, Connecticut, and we're going to talk about U.S. drug policy. I have many goals for addressing the drug law policy. One is to reduce drug use in the United States, to reduce the harm that it does, both socially and economically, and also to improve our national security, which we'll talk about how our current drug laws are actually hurting our national security. So my aim is harm reduction when it comes to drug policy. And before we get into the details of solutions, I'd like each of you to talk about yourselves a little bit and explain how you became involved in drug policy and your own personal experiences and how you came to be here. So Cliff, maybe you could start.
Yeah, I've been looking at drug policy for the past 8 years in earnest. And I head up Efficacy, a drug reform organization. Also, I was the former national chair for the National Green Party. And in the last 3 years, I've spoke at something like 450 venues to hundreds of thousands of people all over Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and South America. And what people have to understand is that the drug war is 2 degrees from everything in society, be it political, be it economic, or humanitarian. And we have to understand that over the 4 decades of this drug war, what has happened is that we've been looking like a dog chasing its tail. A dog never catches its tail, and we will never come to grips with drug policy until we get out of that vein.
Okay, can you talk a little bit about 8 years ago, how did you come to this?
Well, the straw that broke the camel's back for me was I worked at Southern New England Telephone as a middle manager for 25 years. And one of my subordinates was arrested for supposedly selling drugs. Now, I've known this guy for 20 years. And come to find out, he was introduced to a drug dealer. The drug dealer gets busted. And in order for him to get leniency, the drug dealer had to finger X number of people. They gave him 10 years on a conspiracy theory to sell drugs. And like I said, I've known him for 10 years. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink, he didn't even have a girlfriend. And I know he wasn't selling drugs. So this is very common. We're talking about tens of thousands of cases in this country just like him.
I see.
And I started out when looking at it realistically, 2 weeks before I was to graduate high school, a police officer took me to a field of abandoned cars, and under one of these abandoned cars was the body of a naked woman. She was my mother, who had died from an apparent heroin overdose. Now, there are no words to describe how I felt, but one thought resonated as I came to my senses, and that was all illegal drugs should be eradicated from the face of the earth.
It's a natural reaction.
But as I watched decade and watched my native Hartford, Connecticut go downhill, and we were spending more money, I decided I had to learn more about it.
And then 8 years ago, when you saw that travesty of justice occur, you
Right.
started getting active.
Well, actually, it was 12. 8 years I've been doing this work in earnest, and even running for governor of Connecticut to elevate the conversation.
That's right. You were the Green Party candidate for governor in
Right.
2006.
Right, and we did do that. Underhill's ruling is going to help third parties, hopefully. And just this past year in the state legislature, a decrim bill was issued.
For marijuana.
For marijuana,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Joseph, talk a little bit about why you're here.
I spent 4 years in the Marine Corps, was discharged honorably, and joined the Manchester Police Department in 1964. I worked my way up to the rank of captain and was put in charge of the detective division as the commander. In 1980, I don't come to this position on drugs lately. In 1980, I spoke out against the policies that were being enforced at that point in time, feeling that it was a dismal failure even back then. Some of the reasons is materials that I was researching, books I was reading, and some of the inequities of enforcement that I saw. A young man down in South Carolina, for example, was sent to prison for 20 years, and that was widely distributed in the newspapers. During my reign as a commander in the detective division, I implemented and commanded the Tri-Town Narcotics Task Force, which was a 3-town group. Vernon, South Windsor, and Manchester got together and formed a task force to enforce the drug laws because of the displacement, drugs moving from
Right.
one town to another to another.
Was that in the 70s or the 80s?
That was the 80s.
In the 80s, so
Yes,
it was
about-
already a huge problem then, obviously.
Well, yes and no, because we weren't really
You didn't see the level that you do now?
encouraged to admit that we had a drug problem in our towns.
I see.
The effect on real estate, schools, et cetera, et cetera. But we knew it, and we had to do something about it. So as a result of that, we formed the Tri-Town and made significant numbers of arrests. Tri-Town was subsequently copied by other area towns in the state of Connecticut, and we won an award from the Narcotics Association as for our outstanding work in that field. I did not realize that LEAP even existed.
Let me interject here. LEAP
Yes.
is an acronym for Law Enforcement Against Prohibition.
That's correct.
And there's a website that you can go to, www.leap.cc, to learn more about it. But that's how I found you. Was I discovered LEAP a few years ago when I started reading books that we'll talk about drug policy, and I came across LEAP, which was very interesting to me. In fact, I will interject a little bit. Prohibition is a word many of you are probably familiar with. There's a strong parallel between the prohibition of drugs and what happened when we tried prohibition of alcohol back in the early part of the century, which maybe we'll get into a little bit more. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about your personal story before we get into that.
Approximately March of this year, I had written a letter to the editor concerning drugs. Someone in the Manchester area who was involved with LEAP notified me that LEAP existed. I then joined LEAP after researching it and found that there was no speaker for the state of Connecticut. I volunteered to become a speaker. I was given some information, a little bit of training on how to address the issues that LEAP is concerned with. I was introduced to Mr. Thornton, who had been instrumental in helping me spread my name and my recognition around the state.
Yeah.
And LEAP, our message is that we believe in the legalization of all drugs. All drugs. We believe that all drugs should be legalized, controlled, and medicalized where it is appropriate.